Hello and welcome to the Approach Angle podcast, a pitcherless podcast dedicated to teaching you all things baseball analytics. I'm your host, Nate Schwartz, joined as always by Director of Analytics, Kyle Bland. Kyle, how's it going?
It's going great, Nate. Another good day to talk some baseball stats, especially today going through individuals and seeing how the stats line up for them rather than more abstract concepts.
Yeah, it's a pretty funny dichotomy with on my second monitor, I'm watching all of the NCAA regional games going on and, talk about abstract and chaotic baseball. All of these regionals get really, really wonky really quickly. So it's fun as we drill down into some very specific things here. I'm watching kind of the most unethical baseball on my other screen. But yeah, as Kyle kind of mentioned here, we're going to be doing something a little bit different today. So no stat spotlights, no specific methodology to breakdowns or stuff like that. We spent a lot of time building out the analytical toolkit, especially on the hitting side. And today we're really going to put it into use. So we're going to dive deep onto 4 different hitters who have, for better or worse, been impossible to look away from, generally for kind of different reasons. So we're first going to look at Gunnar, Henderson, and Fernando Tatis Jr. as guys who have been really disappointing this year relative to expectations coming into the season. And then we're going to, on the good side, look at Munetaka, Murakami, and Jordan Walker as guys who really look like they're coming into the projections and pedigree that they had from a couple seasons ago. So we're going to be talking everything from swing metrics, plate discipline, batted ball profile, you name it. So if there's any episode and any things that we start talking about that it's still in your queue, still want to listen to, I'd say now's a great time to go back. But I really want to kick things off here with maybe the quietest kind of slumper between the two of them, Gunnar Henderson. This year has been, on the surface, aggressively fine. A 96 WRC plus is just 4% worse than league average. He's hit 13 homers, which is, near the top of the leaderboard. He's stolen stick spaces, but it's just a 218 average, 270 OBP, and 433 slug, paired with a 28% strikeout rate and 6% walk rate. So, Kyle, when you look at Gunnar Henderson, and you see that kind of the top line homer power is there, are you immediately worried about who he is, or is this just kind of a slump?
I'm a little bit concerned because the homer power, it's always been solid. He's never been kind of one of those like light tower power guys who's going to threaten. I know he has almost a 40 homer season under his belt in 2024, but like he's not consistently going to threaten 40. But it's everything else about his profile seems to be kind of falling apart. And it's also not just a 2026 trend either. Probably the biggest kind of canary in the coal mine is bat speed. And I know we had our whole episode on kind of bat speed and some of the bat path metrics and how important they are and how stable and how powerful they can be. And since 2024, he's lost a mile an hour of bat speed each year. So in 2025, he lost 1. So he went from 76 to 75. And then now he's 75 down to 74 and change. And so that's pretty significant losses each year. And especially like now, 2 years kind of makes a trend and not like a fluke. And so that's especially, worrisome to me because that drives so much of like what he does specifically at the plate when you're looking for a guy who has kind of, you're hoping for like there's a 30 homer guy, like I can bank on that. And it's, maybe he's not quite that anymore.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting in the sense that he has still hit 13 homers this year, and he is on pace for, around 30-ish at the moment. Obviously, nothing else has really kind of come to fruition in that regard. And is that something where you think that maybe it's a park factor or he's kind of selling out to hit homers? I thought one thing that was really kind of intriguing, kind of digging deep here, was that his max exit velocity is only down 1 mile an hour from last year. So the bat speed obviously has dropped off a decent amount. That max exit velocity in terms of pure power potential there is only kind of slightly down. But his 90th percentile exit velocity, which we talked about a couple weeks ago now, which really shows you kind of the overall consistency of power, is down 3 miles an hour from 2024. So in 2024, he had like a 108 90th percentile exit velocity that ranked 21st among qualified hitters. This year, it's dropped to about 105, which ranks around 87th among qualified hitters. So really, just a precipitous drop from an elite, power profile down to something that's average, and he's really not making it up for it in any other capacity. When you look at the swing, kind of outside of the pure speed, pure power, was there anything else that you noticed in terms of changes that might be affecting this?
Yeah, so this season he seems to be leveraging more loft in his swing. And so he's at a 12-degree attack angle. And, as a reminder, attack angle is basically the angle with which the bat is hitting the ball vertically at the point of contact. And so a higher angle means it's more of kind of an uppercut swing. You're hitting the ball going upwards, and vice versa. A lower angle means you're hitting it going down. Those tend to correlate well with fly ball and ground ball rates. And so it seems to me that he's selling out a little bit more to maintain that kind of home run pop. So his attack angle this year is 12 degrees versus the last 2 years it was 8 degrees across both. And in the partial data we have for 2023, it was about 10. So he's up across all of them in a pretty substantial 4 degrees from the last 2 years. And so I think that's kind of helping to keep his homer rate afloat, but it's really coming kind of at the expense of everything else. And so this year we had our great BABIP episode with Carson Picard, but he's running a 252 BABIP. I don't expect that to stick around. That low is basically unsustainable. But with how he's kind of selling out this year for power, it's much more believable. And that comes up in our PLVR Process Plus stats. So we have our gap power stat, which is basically how much value is he adding by hitting the ball hard at angles that add hits and add extra bases on batted balls in play. And so in 2024, for example, he was 122. So that's a pretty solid mark. That's about a standard deviation and a half above average. So 122. And then this year he's down to 104. So more roughly average, while the homer power was the same. And so what that means to me is, his ISO is going to take a hit. And you can see that from 2024 to this year, it's down 30 points. The BABIP is going to take a hit because now those hits in play are less impactful. They're less optimized. And so that we're seeing that a ton. Obviously, I think there's still going to be some positive regression, but that's still worrisome. That's going to affect his average. And then even outside of his damage on contact, he's trending down in some of the other metrics that we look at too. He's making poorer decisions. So his decision value is down 20 points. And so that's basically a standard deviation and a half relative to league average. It's 85 now. It was 106 in 2024. And the thing that's also quite worrisome to me is that he's below average both in and out of zone. So it's not like he's trying to be more passive, and so he's just seeing more pitches, and sometimes he's letting hittable ones go by, or he's not trying to flat be more aggressive, and so maybe he's chasing a little bit more because he's trying to hit in the zone more. But this is actually he's doing the worst combination of swinging less often than he should in the zone and more often than he should out of the zone. And so that's problematic because, like we talked about in our decision value and plate discipline episode, that kind of sets your floor. That sets here's the clay that you have to work with to mold by making contact and by hitting the ball hard. Is it matters what pitches you swing at, and he's not really setting himself up for success there. And even in addition to that, his contact by our metrics, his contact plus, has also gone down about 10 points to a little under 1 standard deviation of league quality. And that all of those things combined has brought his process plus, which is solidly 120, 125-ish. He even got up to the 140s on a hot streak in 2024 and 2025. And this year it's just flirting right around a league average value of 100. because he's not hitting the ball hard enough outside of homers to do a ton of damage and to add a bunch of value there. And he's making poor decisions and not really adding contact value either. So all of those are lining up to, it is kind of an empty calorie homer hitter at this point. And I'm generally fading him because I know going into the season he was a very, very high draft pick. He had, a ton of prospect pedigree. Him and Corbin Carroll were kind of the elite members of that prospect class that came out. And then, he did hit the ground running, almost 30 homers his first, his rookie season. And then in 2024, he had the 37 homer, 20 stolen base campaign, which is, massive, both in reality, he was an 8-WAR player that year, and that's great for fantasy as well. But yeah, he seems to have kind of regressed from that point with a player his age. I mean, he's only 24. I think it's likelier than most that he can kind of get back to those peaks that he showed us. But I'm at this point definitely in more of a wait and see. So like if I have him on my fantasy teams, I'm shopping him. I might not be actively trying to sell high on kind of name value and prospect pedigree, but I'm seeing what I can get. And I would be hesitant to buy him because you're basically only buying youth and that 2024 season that is every year getting further and further in the window. So yeah, it's a worrisome profile. I want to see him get better, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think one of the key indicators I look at when I'm trying to find guys who are slumping is, what does their swing aggression look like? Are they, trying to be way too passive and say, hey, like I'm only going to look for my pitch to snap out of it? Or I'm swinging out of my shoes and going to say, hey, I used to hit the ball hard. I can hit a ton of homers, and all I'm going to do is swing and hope for the best. And when you look at, we'll look at 24 and 26 here. In 2024, Gunnar Henderson was about a 25th percentile aggressive hitter. So definitely on the passive side, his kind of peaks were right around the league average on a rolling basis, and the lows were around 10 percentile. So really, you could see that he was very good at waiting for his pitch and just absolutely crushing, what he was looking for. And you could see that in the swing rates, in the zone contact rates. 2024 was he had a 86% zone contact, which is a pretty good figure. But then you compare that to this season, and he's about a 75th percentile aggressive hitter. And that tells me that he is just swinging, and that goes along with what Kyle was saying a little bit, in that he's making worse decisions in zone and out of the zone. He's got a 35% chase rate, which is one of the, 37% chase rate, which is one of the higher figures in baseball right now. And it's just kind of an anomaly to where we've seen him in years past. And over the last, couple of weeks, that aggression has trended up closer to around 80th percentile. So that really tells me that he is just swinging, trying to figure this out, and it's not working. He's able to sell out for power, and you can see the quality in there where he is still running into a few pitches to hit 4 homers. And I think it's fascinating that his barrel rate is actually 1% higher than it was last year. He had a 8.5% barrel rate last year, and that's 9.5% this year. But he was about 25% better last year by WRC plus than he was this year. So it really tells you just how much things are out of whack. And as Kyle said, the peripherals where he's striking out more and walking less is really something that, opens up a profile where you see these things as sticky as things go on, even as a player fluctuates. And as both the batted ball profile and, swing decisions and plate discipline stuff open up, it really kind of opens a can of worms of, who he really might be as a hitter going forward. And I kind of agree with Kyle where I wouldn't be necessarily buying low if I had an opportunity to do so.
Yeah, and you mentioned that the barrel rate is up. I think some of that is it's at 24. It feels like he's like old man optimizing, of like selling out to try and hit barrels as often as he could at the expense of everything else. So it's not the stickiest or like the most powerful measure, but I think where something like his drop in gap power comes through is in his flares and burners. And so those are balls that are usually, hit hard enough that they kind of get through that infield defense, or hit, at just the right angle to land in kind of shallow outfield. And that's down 8% this year. And like those do land for hits. That's where Luis Arias, makes all of his money, is getting those hits, landing, get a single, get your on base, that kind of thing. So, he's up 1% in barrel rate. He's up almost like a little over 0.5% in solid contact, but he's down that full 8% in flares and burners. And so I think that, it shows that he's concentrating what he's doing on like the best possible contact, which is maintaining kind of those top end outcomes like homers, but it's coming at the expense of the less optimal but still quite valuable forms of contact.
So I think my final question on Gunnar here is most of I don't have pitcher list rest of the season projections in front of me, which you may know a thing or two about, but I am looking at the rest of the publicly available projections on Fangraphs, and they all kind of generally have him pegged for about a 125 to 130 WRC plus rest of the way, about a 260th average, and 18 to 20 homers. Are you buying on any of those, that he reaches those, as some of that luck bounces out? Or are you going to take the under and say, that full season stat line, even, whatever, a month, 2 months into the season, is going to be disappointing through and through?
Yeah, I'm going to be fading that. I'm a little less bullish on his walk rate, given kind of the trend we're seeing in his decision value. I don't think his strikeout rate's going to stay at 28%. I think that'll definitely come back down to average. His career average. I think, 18 homers in, there's probably about 400 and change plate appearances left in the season, given that we're at the end of May. I think, 15, like I would probably say like anywhere from like 12 to 15 homers rest of season is more what I would be looking at. I'm generally a little bit pessimistic. I've, even going into the season, PLV projections were kind of low on Gunnar. And so like somewhat justified holistically, even if, we're missing the homer projection, at least as it stands right now. But yeah, if we're going by projections, PLV is definitely going to be fading him the most of what's out there right now, given a lot of the stats that we've talked about.
Which makes a lot of sense given everything we talked about for him. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to get into one of the players who has been performing really well. And we're back. So we just talked about a guy who is striking out a little bit too much, and now we're going to talk about someone who's striking out even more but is succeeding through that, and that's Munetaka Murakami. He's really just kind of taken the league by storm in the first 2 months of the year. A 161 WRC plus is just unbelievable for a rookie. He's hitting only 242, but a 381 on base percentage with a 566 slug is exceptional. That 32% strikeout rate does stand out, but he does have an 18% walk rate. And then he's hit 20 homers, which really, is kind of the selling point with Murakami. And a lot of the talk about Murakami when he came over was that he wasn't going to make enough contact to live. And we can see that in the stats that, he is one of the lowest in baseball at making contact, especially in the zone. And clearly it doesn't matter. He's finding ways to be productive, hitting the pitches he needs to hit. Kyle, when you look at Murakami, what is the kind of first thing that stands out about his profile?
I think the first thing that stands out is the whiff rate sounds horrific. And I get it. It's bad. It's like a 16%. I believe that it's not what you want at all. But I think that it seems a lot like, I believe his 32% strikeout rate more, because I think he is very particular about where he whiffs. And so like someone like O'Neal Cruz has a 35% strikeout rate with a lower whiff rate. And you think, well, how does that happen? It's because he has a higher called strike rate. He's letting more pitches go by in the zone, so he's still allowing more strikes. And something that's very interesting, particularly about Murakami, is he drops his whiff rate in 2 strike counts. So when he's in kind of those put away rate counts, he's whiffing a little under 35% of the time, which is bad. League average is 25, so that's still quite bad. But that's notably less than in his season long whiff rate, which is about 42%. So he really like kind of hunkers down. He has this 2-strike approach. And for context, you think of Corey Seager. Corey Seager's, an impressive, like he understands the strike zone. He's a great kind of all facets hitter, can hit for average, can hit for power. Well, he's whiffing 41% of the time in 2-strike counts. So Murakami is being a little bit more kind of judicious with, well, if he's early in the count or ahead in the count, he can kind of really let it rip and kind of be a little looser with what he's swinging at. And so he gets his whiffs then, which is smart because if he whiffs, that's just a strike. It doesn't end the plate appearance like it does in a 2-strike count. And I think it's doubly impactful because he's not letting it cost him, or at least he has so much power in that bat. He has so much ability to do damage on contact that even if he trades some for some contact gains in 2-strike counts, he's more than capable of putting the ball over the outfield fence. And part of that is because he's just fully optimized for hitting those fly balls in the air and doing damage. He has a 19-degree attack angle. I know we talked with, Gunnar's was he upped his to 12. Well, Murakami's up to 19, which is the second highest in baseball, only after Zach Neto. So that's, this is a guy who's just all uppercut swing. He's trying to hit those batted balls just in the air and hit them far. He's also got a 20% pull air rate, which is quite good. So not only is he hitting the ball in the air, he's hitting it to the pull side, which, as we talked about a little bit, when you pull the ball, your swing's longer, so you're likely hitting the ball. And a longer swing means you have more time to get up to speed. And so those are some of his fastest swings, are where he's kind of hitting those balls in the air, which are going to go for homers. And we can see that, when we look at his kind of like holistic batted ball profile, that he does tend to just hammer fly balls right in the center of that homer band more often than league average. And the stat that I am particularly fond of, I made it, is our homer power plus. So basically looking at, given the modeled home run expectation of every pitch that he made contact with, how often or how many homers was Murakami adding by how hard he hit the ball and the angles that he hit the ball at. And then that's on a plus scale. So 100 is league average, 15 is roughly a standard deviation. He's at 164 this year. So you'll note that's 4 standard deviations. So elite player. For context, since 2023, 4 players have had a homer plus power plus of 160 or higher. Schwarber's doing it this year. Ohtani did it last year. Joey Gallo, who is, a lot of people's main comp to Murakami, at least the top end Murakami was the best version of Joey Gallo, and that's kind of proving true. Joey Gallo did it in 2023. And then, of course, Aaron Judge has run a 160 home run power plus every season since 2023. That he's consistently, matching the ball, which tracks the preeminent home run hitter of this generation is the air with which Murakami finds himself right now. So I think, everybody knows that was Murakami's job, to hit dingers. He's doing that. The worry was the strikeout rate. It's elevated, definitely, but I think it's, even with the whiff rates that he has, I think it's sustainable, that I think he's capable of managing kind of that strikeout rate around 30, low 30s. I know there's going to be some adjustments that pitchers are going to make, try and find some holes. And I'm sure, I'm a little less worried that adjustments will affect, matter to him, because he's already proven that he can more or less catch up to Major League Velo. That was the big concern coming out of the NPB from Japan, was how's he going to fare against Major League Velo and stuff. And so far he's proving that he can catch up, that he can do it. And so I'm a little more confident that he can kind of maintain the success even as pitchers get more looks at him.
Yeah, the biggest thing that calls out to me on Murakami is the fact that whiff rate is lower in 2-strike counts. That tells me that there is a conscious approach at the plate. It isn't just swing out of my shoes all the time and hope for the best. It's not these, you know, the people who are, anti the three true outcome approach, which Murakami embodies more than just about anyone. It's like, oh, well, he's selling out for power when he shouldn't be. It's very clear that, yes, he has a two-strike approach. We are seeing that two-strike approach. And he is kind of saying a lot of the time that, yeah, I'm probably taking something off of my swing. Like, I'm doing something differently in two-strike counts. Yes, I'm not going to hit a homer, but that's okay because I'm trusting everything else, and I'm gonna try and fight it off. Because earlier in the count, he's going to take his shots, and he might swing and miss, and that's okay because right now he knows that he is eventually going to run into one. Murakami's two comps that you kind of mentioned in terms of who's done it, this much homer power in Schwarber and Joey Gallo, I think really kind of puts shows you where the line is and where maybe a lot of people were hesitant in terms of, there is a very thin floor, where he is it about to fall off a cliff? Like, how sustainable is it? And the two things I kind of look for there are, going to your decision value and your zone and out of zone decision value. So basically for Murakami, for Schwarber, are you making the right decisions to keep this up? Because we know you're not going to make contact. What is going through your mind to make the decisions that are turning into homers, because they just will happen. And this year, for example, Schwarber's decision value overall is 105. Murakami's is 121. So he is out Schwarbering Schwarber in this sense, which is kind of the biggest green flag. And if you look at zone decision value, Schwarber's at a 90, which is slightly below average, and Murakami's at 98, so almost league average. Again, slight, but it's one of those things that you're seeing it work for someone else. And in the trade-offs of contact, because Kyle Schwarber, believe it or not, makes a little bit more contact than somebody, that is where that pays off. If you want to go kind of to the further side in Joey Gallo, his decision value in 2023 was 100. So just league average, and that's clear that that part is not sustainable. So as he's keeping it up in terms of making the right decisions, he is getting to the place that he needs to be, which is really really exciting. I think kind of the other part of it, as you said, is that he is handling major league stuff. I think it's worth noting that he does have a pretty significant hole at the top of the zone, but he's still been able to hit fastballs really, really well. This year, he is slugging 707 on fastballs alone, which is just kind of bonkers. And the expected slugging more or less agrees with that. And he's hit 13 homers off of them as well. And then the breaking pitches is where the biggest struggle has come from. So it really tells me that, he isn't likely going to continue to get as many fastballs, and they'll definitely taper off, but you need to face fastballs, and he's just putting himself in a position where we see where it's sustainable, and he can keep this up. I don't know if he necessarily keeps up a bonkers 48% homer to fly ball ratio, which when half of your fly balls are turning into homers, that just is ridiculous. But overall, this does look to be a premier power bat who is going to stick around for maybe a little bit more than the contract suggested, and I think a lot of people thought at first.
Yeah, absolutely. And even, just to kind of put a bow on it from a fantasy standpoint, yeah, it's dinger centric that he's now kind of showing himself to be one of the premier home run hitters in baseball. And I think that that's going to stick around. I think that's who he is for sure. I think he has a 240 average right now, which feels a little high to me. I think that's probably going to be the best you can hope for. I expect a little bit of regression coming down from that. I know we're expecting a 232 BABIP on our pitcher list expected BABIP, which takes into account spray direction. So we kind of know which directions, all those batted balls are going. And a high fly ball hitter who does kind of tend to pull some of his ground balls is going to be a very low expected BABIP kind of hitter. But remember, homers aren't part of BABIP, so that's going to improve it a lot. But I would expect kind of those other hits to fall a little bit less. So I think his average will come down. And then something else that I think has snuck up on a lot of people this season is the White Sox have been quite an effective offense. They're 7th by expected WOBA and 8th by WRC plus, so top 10 in both measures. I think, Colson Montgomery was another kind of PLV favorite going into this season, and he's kind of proving that out. But I think this sneakily effective Chicago White Sox lineup is going to be a boost. So I think, if he's hitting dingers with that lineup in front of him, and especially Miguel Vargas has been kind of great at getting on base. He's been one of the premier on base merchants this year, running a 364. Thanks primarily due to a ton of he's got like the league best decision value by our metrics. So all of that is just going to mean Murakami's racking up kind of those run and RBI counting stats too.
Yeah, I do want to call out on Miguel Vargas. Do you remember a couple of years ago when he hurt his hand during spring training and all he did was just stand in the plate? I think he maybe walked a few times, believe it or not, but he went up for multiple games of spring training saying, I'm not going to swing. And it worked. So, talk about a guy who is clued into figuring out his decision value. I really like what Miguel Vargas is doing. My last question on Murakami is that looking at his NPB stats, so obviously there is a bit of an adjustment. There's a very clear, jump in strikeout rate from his peaks from like 2020 to 2022, where he was like a 20 to 22% strikeout guy. Up to from 23 to 25, he got close to 28, 29%. And that's where a lot of the hesitations came in of who is he as a hitter? How is he going to adjust to major league caliber pitching? And, that's where these strikeouts are coming. And obviously he's playing into that with, a 30%, 32% strikeout rate, more or less going exactly as projected. Do you think there's any chance he's able to dial something in and kind of cut that down as he figures out major league pitching over time and sees that, oh, this is the premier competition. I can do some things. I can, bring out this early career profile that just unlocks, the guy we really thought he was going to be a couple years ago when it was like, oh, this is going to be the hitter after Shohei.
Yeah, I don't think that version of Murakami's coming back. The 40, 50, 56 homer guy in a league where that's twice, that was a 225 WRC plus. That's basically the best MLB season ever. And that's the comp that he did in the NPB. I don't think that guy's coming back. I think, the more recent vintage, the last 3 years where he was pretty consistently, 150, 150. In 2025, he was actually quite good. He was another 200 plus WRC plus 200 WRC plus. Even with kind of that elevated 29% strikeout rate. I think that's more the hitter. So this 160 WRC plus on the back of massive homer power, a great walk rate, and a bad but usable strikeout rate, I think that's the hitter who he is. I think as far as adjustments, I think there's enough juice on both sides that it comes out in the wash that I think, like you said, he's got a little bit of a hole at the top of his swing. If pitchers can kind of optimize their approach, and especially trying to get him to chase, to be a little bit more whiff prone in 2 strike counts, that if they can goad him there, that's he's shown he can whiff a lot. And if they can crack that code for 2 strike counts, and I think there's a cliff for his strikeout rate for sure. But at the same time, he's shown that he can improve, that he can meet a lot of what they're doing. And at the same time, he's still, 26. That's relatively young, all things considered, especially when you consider that he's a rookie. This is his first time, not just facing MLB caliber stuff, but like North American caliber stuff, like not even, guys who throw 100 but can't locate in the minors. That, this is his first time seeing those high 90s fastballs, and these are the guys who can also command it the best in the world. So I think, there's enough that this is, ideally, I would say ideally, like I think this is a best case outcome for him is what he's doing right now. And if this is kind of sticks around, I think, the White Sox, are going to come out like bandits with that contract they signed him. And a bunch of teams are going to be kicking themselves that they didn't sign him to a longer contract, or even just the one the White Sox gave him.
So are you buying him in fantasy formats where you might have someone who's maybe a little wary that it does kind of fade away, and you're like, I'll buy this power. I think I have it for a couple of years.
Oh, I'm all in. Yeah, I would buy him everywhere. I mean, unless it's maybe a points league where there's a strikeout penalty, but even in average leagues, I'm in. I love these kind of min max guys where I was always buying Joey Gallo, that I can work a lineup differently, that those are going to kind of be slightly depressed values if a guy's really good at batting average but bad power, or vice versa, rather than like a 5 category contributor. Those guys go for a premium. And so I tend to love these kind of profiles where it relies on manager skill to kind of build a lineup that plays off of each other well. And so I love him. And especially in an OBP league, I'm buying everywhere that I can get him if walks are in consideration.
For sure. We're gonna take a quick ad break, and when we come back, we're gonna be talking about probably the biggest name on this episode. And we're back. So when I meant the biggest name here that we're going to talk about, I think his struggles have been the most pronounced of the two, and in terms of success as well, I think these struggles have kind of stood out, and that's Fernando Tatis Jr. He's hitting 260, 339 with an abysmal 300 slugging, which turns into a 0.040 ISO. It's a 22% strikeout rate, a 10% walk rate, which all look fine. Obviously, the big one here is that he has yet to hit a single homer. He's at least stolen 14 bases, and it's a 90 WRC plus. Kyle, what's wrong with Fernando Tatis Jr.?
I mean, what's wrong with him is he's getting outslugged by noted power hitter Steven Kwan and Nick Gonzalez. Like that, those guys are running ISOs higher than Fernando Tatis Jr. That's insane. I think some of that is a little bit of luck, depending on how you view it. So he's got a 294 WOBA, which is bad. If you look at StatCast's expected WOBA, it's 345. So he's hitting at the angles he hits the ball, at the exit velos he hits the ball at. He's doing that's a solidly above average hitter. So he's been very lucky by their metric. Our expected WOBA, which takes into account spray, so is he pulling it? Is he hitting it center? Is he hitting it oppo? It's a 287. So that's right in line with what we've seen. So basically that his poor WOBA is legit. And what that comes from is his batted ball profile. So I've pulled up, we have our pitcher list, we have our batted ball charts, so you can kind of see the combination of where they're pulling it and where they're hitting in the air, if a batter's hitting it more or less often than league average, or for, relevant for Tatis, than what he did last year. And so this year, he's pulling the ball a lot less. He's down 8% from 2025. He's hitting the ball on the ground more. He's up almost 5% on ground balls. And he's also up about 6% on line drives, which sounds good, but all of that is being driven by line drives to the opposite field. So he's just spraying the ball basically at a low launch angle, not quite, even the ones in the air, he's not quite hitting that high. His fly ball rates and his pop-up rates are down a lot. And so as a consequence of that, by our metrics, his home run power plus, which I've talked about, has regressed a lot. It's still roughly average. It's 102, league average is 100. So still solid, but in previous years it was 113, 119, so a little more pop. It's a very interesting underlying mix because he's got his career best bat speed. So he's swinging the fastest bat of his career. His average is over 75 miles an hour, which is, elite. But that is paired with a career lowest attack angle of 7 degrees. And that's leading to a quite low 50.6% ideal contact rate. Ideal angle rate, attack angle rate. And that basically means is the attack angle, is the vertical direction that he's hitting the ball, is that between 5 and 20 degrees, which is usually where damage happens. That's where your extra bases, that's where your homers happen. And so he's down 5% from his past seasons because he's got a much flatter, a much lower attack angle. And something else to kind of keep in mind. So that explains a little bit of the homer power outage. Something that lines up with his spray tendencies of hitting the ball more to the opposite field or center rather than pole, is he's letting the ball travel deeper. And so the way to think about that is the ball is getting closer to him now, which means it's harder for him to get out in front of it. And getting out in front is where you pull the ball, that you have to be further into your swing. And so the longer your swing is, the more like out in front you'll be. And so generally, if you're out in front making contact, that's where pulled contact lives. And so letting the ball travel deeper at the point of contact means that he's either waiting to swing a little bit longer to try and get this more all fields approach that he has, or he's maybe not seeing the ball as well. Whatever reason, that ball's coming in, it's taking longer to get to him, which means, even with a fast bat speed, he still can't get up out in front of it. So when he makes contact, it's either going straight back up the middle or it's going to the opposite field. And these combinations, low attack angle, ball traveling deeper, so he's spraying it around the field more than pulling it, lead to his lowest pull rate of his career by 5%. He's under 32%, which is 10% lower than the MLB average even. And then kind of the most worrisome is he has a 7.1 pull air rate. So 7.1% of his batted balls are being pulled in the air. And that's where your homers live. That's where your power lives. That's the Isaac Paredes zone. And that's down 5% from last year. And last year was the lowest mark of his career. So he's really trending down in kind of this batted ball profile in a way that is backed up by things like his stance, things like his bat path. And so that's especially worrisome to me.
Yeah, I know it's been almost comical at this point that it hasn't happened. But really, the interesting thing to me is that while the batted ball profile has changed so dramatically, the underlying discipline really hasn't changed significantly on the surface. And while obviously there are things going on, the strikeout rate is about the same, the walk rate is about the same from career norms. He's chasing, in line with his career norms. The one thing that calls out to me is that his zone contact has steadily increased up throughout his career. The first couple of years for Tatis, we can, debate on how much, other factors were at play in his performance, but he ran around an 80% zone contact from 2019 to 2023. And then in 24, it went to 85, 86, and then this year it is at 88%. And that kind of goes in line with how you think about a guy who is turning into more of an all fields approach. You're making more contact, you're trying to put the ball in play more. And obviously, again, it's not going to happen to this extreme, especially when the hard hit rates are maintaining. But I wonder really if he's pigeonholed himself into a situation where, he is thinking about not necessarily hitting a homer and it just hasn't happened. And then it's just he's kind of leaning into it at this point. In previous years, he's really crushed fastballs. Last year, he was around, I think it was like 95th percentile decision value on fastballs, which is as good as it gets. You throw him a fastball, he knows what to do with it. This year, well, the year started out really, really well. He was above 90th percentile. That has really dropped precipitously over the last month or so. And that really tells me that maybe he is actually getting in his head, not trying to hit anything for power when he absolutely should. When you're swinging the bat as hard as you are, you should be trying to kind of tap into that power. And kind of the other factor that almost makes the power outage comical is that, on first thought, when you think of Petco Park, you don't think of it as a particularly hitter-friendly park. It has some cool air at night. The ball doesn't travel as far. You pull up the homer park factor for Petco on StatCast for right-handed hitters. It's 116, which is the fourth highest in baseball. It is only trailing Dodger Stadium, Yankee Stadium, and Great American Small Park. And a lot of that is because you have a very easy to clear left field fence, but right field is not easy to get to. So even though he's having a decent amount of barrels, the barrel rate is sitting at 10%, which is it's slightly down from last year and obviously down from his career highs, but it's not necessarily awful by any stretch of the imagination. None of these are clearing the fence. The park factor for left-handed hitters at Petco Park is 25th. It's that's overall. The left-handed park factor is 15th. So obviously it's not as high, but it is still something where it's, oh, you're hitting the ball to the place in the ballpark where it's not doing well and you're already struggling. So he's not even going to get the one to break the seal easily. He'd have to really crush one.
Yeah, and I think, you mentioned that Petco's a pretty solid home park for homers. And, love Baseball Savant, great website, looking through their expected home runs, because they have all of the great, they know where the outfield wall is for all of these. And he's at 1.6 expected homers. So he's definitely underperforming there, not by, a ton, but it's more than zero that he has. But what they also break it out by park. And there are two stadiums in baseball where Fernando Tatis Jr. would have 0 home runs if all of his batted balls were there. One is Oracle, which is a very tough, park for to get, especially that right field is very, very tough to get out of. But the other one is San Diego. So all of his batted balls, none of them would be homers in San Diego specifically. Every other stadium, he's got at least one, and even up to 4 if he was in Philly. So I think that goes to show that Tatis has been unlucky. I don't disagree with that. It's more the scale of how unlucky he is. I've talked a bit about his batted ball profile, means that he's probably going to underperform even what StatCast says his expected WOBA is, assuming it continues. He's not going to sit at 0 home runs all season. That's basically impossible for a hitter with his talent and especially that bat speed. But I don't think he's going to necessarily be that guy. He might not clear 20 this season, or he has an outside shot to clear 20 for the entire year, which would be just a huge disappointment for any fantasy players, any Padres fans, and for the Padres as a team.
Yeah, I know they have the third worst offense in baseball by WRC plus, and a lot of that you are relying on him to figure it out. And it's one of those things that does go beyond the stats sometimes, where is someone, are they pressing too much? Even if the batted ball, even if the stats look like that, when everyone's turning to Tatis, oh, maybe it's a bad pitcher on the other side. It's like, oh, this is the game. He hits one 440 to left field and all's good in the world. Like sometimes that is not the nature of baseball.
Or even he gets enough of one, barely clears the wall, but now the monkey's off his back. Maybe he's a little less in his head now, a little less, overthinking things at the plate. And so he gets back into his rhythm. These are humans. As much as we love breaking down all the advanced stats and trying to quantify and put a number to everything, there's also a massive psychological component that goes into all this. And so, he's got the talent. That's not, up for debate. That's not in any doubt. And so it is just maybe he gets that monkey off his back and then he's back to the hitter we know and love.
So are you buying him going forward?
I'm buying that he's better than what he's shown us. Absolutely. I think in fantasy, I might be interested in him kind of as a speed play. He's got 15 or 14 stolen bases already in roughly a third of a season. So, you prorate that out. That's 40 stolen bases, and, projections have him getting about, upper teens, maybe 20 the rest of the way. I tend to think that stolen bases are a stat that you get a lot of signal very quickly. And so base runners will tend to tell you, I'm running this season. And Tatis has shown me that. And so I think, he's still getting on base at a decent clip, even with his power outage. He's running when he gets on base. I think the power stats will come back up. Maybe not quite to be like the 130 WRC plus hitter he was, but if he can be, 15 homers, 20, 25 stolen bases the rest of the season, that's an extremely valuable bat. And you might be able to get him at extremely reduced, rates, because that 0 home runs stands out so drastically.
Yeah, I know. The stolen bases thing is nice because it shows you that he is trying to, contribute in any way that he can, even if the homers aren't there. So we're going to take one more break, and when we come back, we're going to be talking about one more player here, and that's Jordan Walker. And we're back, and we are going to talk about one more. I'm really excited to talk about him. I think he was the inspiration for this episode as a whole. And you've heard of him on just about every single podcast we've done so far, even the ones where we've talked about pitching. And that's Jordan Walker. He really struggled for his first couple of years, and this year has just been unbelievable. A great breakout. It's a 300 average, 367 OBP, 576 slugging. Only a 25% strikeout rate, believe it or not, 9% walk rate, and then 15 homers, which is phenomenal. He's added in 7 stolen bases, and it comes out to a 166 WRC plus. Really kind of living up to the pedigree of someone who had really high prospect rankings and was expected to be maybe not even like this when he was coming up, and it's just been unbelievable. But when you look at the profile, the first thing that would stand out is your plate discipline stats. And obviously the strikeout rate is down, but you go one step deeper in looking at his chase rate and his zone contact. And his chase rate is actually up 2.5% from last year, and his zone contact is down about 1% from last year. And those were the two things that a lot of people talked about he needs to make better decisions on swinging out of the zone and hit more balls in the zone. And he's doing neither, and yet he's been so good. So, what is working for Jordan Walker this year that hasn't necessarily worked in years past?
Yeah, I mean, I think we touched on it a little bit. The decisions are a little bit better, incrementally better, which is nice. But I think what it comes down to is, it's been a through line of all of these hitters so far is bat path. That he's got much more loft in his swing. So he's at a 9-degree attack angle now versus 6 in 2025. So that's more balls that are going to be hit into the air. And he's got just a beastly bat speed. It's 100th percentile. You go to his Baseball Savant page, and his little lollipop has that nice 100 in it. Literally like one of the fastest bat speeds in the entire league, averaging almost 79 miles an hour. And so if you can get that with any sort of loft, that's going to be massive, even for a guy like Jordan Walker, where it's still, maybe a little bit below what we'd hope, but any little bit counts. And so that attack angle increase has led to an 8% jump in his ideal attack angle rate. And when you combine an ideal attack angle with like one of the fastest swings in baseball, that's going to lead to many, many more home runs. And so that's what we're seeing from Jordan Walker. And part of that too is he's also pulling the ball a lot more than he has in the past. So he's up 6% versus 2025. And some of that is that he's hitting the ball further out in front. So we talked about Tatis letting the ball travel deeper. Well, Jordan Walker is doing the opposite, that he's letting the ball come to him, or he's getting the ball out in front a little bit more. He's hitting the ball 2 inches further out in front than he was last year, and more in line with what he was doing in prior years. But now he's also folding in the loft. So he's getting the best of all worlds. He's setting himself up in a position to pull the ball more, and he's setting himself up in a position to hit the ball in the air more. And yeah, like I said, with the tool, with the just pure raw power that he has, he finally kind of unlocked what a lot of people saw in his, even from way back when he was a prospect.
Yeah, for me, it's really interesting as someone who is, very well documented, clued into the Cardinals and Jordan Walker specifically. But a lot of the things circulating when he had this breakout, especially early in the season, was he went to Driveline and Driveline fixed everything. And that really wasn't the case for him. Yes, he went to Driveline, and I'm sure a lot of the things that have come from that, or a lot of the season, has been a product of the work he did at Driveline. And I know his hitting coach is now an assistant hitting coach with the Nationals, so really in good company. But he didn't show up in spring training like ready to go, like, new year, new me, best shape of my life. He had to take like a week off of games. He was only in the cages, like something wasn't right, and he was able to settle it. And that really indicates to me that even if none of these stats kind of on their own stand out, of like, oh, there's this massive change that has completely fixed everything. Everything is slightly better in the margins, but it seems like that was built in a really strong way. Just looking at the, you called out his pull rate is, it's at 40%. It's up 6% from last year, but in 2024 it was 41%. So again, it's not like this, oh, he's pulling the ball more than he ever has. I think the biggest one is that loft, as you called out to. His fly ball rate is the highest of his career. But again, going back to 2024, his fly ball rate was 24.1%, and it's 26% this year. So it's not, and he was in 2024 a 72 WRC plus bat. So it's not these things that it's, oh, he's doing something dramatically different on the results level stuff. It's really the swing path and the decision making that really calls out to you. For me, I think the other thing in terms of decisions is that he's hitting and deciding on fastballs a lot better. He is a, generally speaking, horrendously bad decision maker on fastballs, despite them being his best pitch. But this year, it's only around 5th percentile compared to the probably 1 percentile decision value, 1st percentile decision value last year. And it's one of those things where for a power hitter like him, the margins are really where everything kind of comes together. And as he's established that he can hit for power in the zone, it improves everything else. You've seen the walk rate tick up a little bit. Pitchers are a little bit more scared to throw inside to him and, just give him the get me over pitch. And I think for all of the things that have gone wrong early in his career, it seems like he's crafting a sustainable approach to be able to deal with, the cold streaks and stuff like that will come with a guy who whiffs a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things, this is just, I'm sure, the Jordan Walker experience, is there's so much potential that you can see. And, a 79 mile an hour bat is going to, that's going to give you a lot of hope. But it's, we've been talking about pull air rates and how, Murakami has a 20% pull air rate and Jordan Walker's is 15. And, this is his first season in 3 years that it's even above league average. And so you're like, well, imagine if he can make these gains. And, we talked about, well, he's added pull rate this year. He's added air ball, like fly balls, line drives in the air. He's still below average in all of those things. He's below average by pull rate. He's roughly average this year by pull rate. He's below average by fly balls and line drives, in the air. There's just a lot of, he's below average by pulled balls in the air on kind of the ones that we've been talking about. And so I think that there's just if he can further optimize it, if he can just get to those a little bit more, maybe it's kind of the anti Murakami of try to hunt those pitches or try to hit those balls out in front and maybe whiff more, but at the expense of hitting the ball where at a location where you can do damage. Maybe try and get out in front and maybe you're early on some pitches and you whiff a little bit, but that's fine. He's got a 25% strikeout rate, up, kind of an unspoken massive increase too from definitely last year. It was almost 32, but that gives him a ton of wiggle room with which to okay, I can maybe hunt a little bit more. I can try and hit a pitch out in front where I want it rather than do what I'm doing right now. And, like you said, he's had a lot of really good coaching around him, he's been through a lot of dev and it seems to finally be paying off. And hopefully, there's even a little bit more juice to squeeze from all of the tools that he has.
Yeah, for me, after his rookie year, everyone was just oh, he just needs to pull the ball in the air. And it cannot be overstated how difficult that is to do in some overarching way for a guy who is that tall with that long of levers. I think a really good comp to him, obviously the decision value is a little bit different, is James Wood, where everyone wants to see him pull the ball in the air, and he can do it occasionally, but that's not what his swing is meant to primarily do. So how do you improve in the margins? How can you get to, just more good contact already? You swing the bat harder than anyone else does in baseball. All you got to do is put the barrel on it. And it seems that he's kind of made those changes in order to unlock that. And, whether it's luck. I mean, I don't think a 300 average is going to stick, but his flares and burners is up significantly. So there are things that weren't falling for hits in years past that are. He's making just better quality of contact across the board, and it's really exciting for even last year he had an 11% barrel rate and an 091 ISO. That's something right out of Fernando Tatis Jr.'s 2026, but he's made the changes that's ticked up to around 16%, and it's just really, really exciting. But my question here for a guy who has been as volatile as he has, are you buying this? Is he here to stay? How much regression are you going to see? Or is this something that is maybe more of a flash in the pan than anyone wants to really say?
Yeah, I like it. I think there's a lot of kind of sustainable changes that it looks like he's made. I don't think he's necessarily getting really lucky with with what he's doing with what his setup is. I think he's like you said, he's not going to be hitting for a 300 average. His WOBA's going to dip back under 400, but like I still think upper 300s WOBA, probably like a WRC plus in the 140 150 range is fully in the cards, the St. Louis cards, if you will. But I think, another mid-teens homers the rest of the season. He steals enough bags to be plus there. So like he ends the season at something like a 30 homer, 15 stolen base campaign with something like a 270, maybe even 280 average. It's going to be massive, especially for, where most people drafted Jordan Walker. I think, that tremendous success. I'm not buying him at the current level of performance, but if people are trying to sell him or if people are more skeptical, I would be happy to kind of snatch him up there.
Yeah, I know most of rest of the season projections have him around like a 110 to 115 WRC plus bat. And that's coming with around a 240, 250 average. So, even if he hits 240, 250 over the rest of the season, that equals to that 270, 280 overall if you're looking at something in a roto league, and it's not necessarily going to sink you like a 170, a 180 might. But that'll really do it for this episode of the Approach Angle podcast. We've taken a look at 4 different guys here. I think we're most in any direction buying on Murakami's performance this year. I think we're saying that Gunnar Henderson, a little bit worried on those struggles. I think Tatis is going to figure it out, even if it's not going to be the peaks that we've seen. And we're kind of, optimistic on Jordan Walker, but not sell the farm if you're trying to acquire him in a dynasty league. But for what's going on for you this week?
Yeah, so we've got our Pitcherless Pro dashboard. It's in the final stages of dev. I've gotten my hands on some kind of beta testing, and it's a lot of fun. You can import your fantasy leagues and see all of these cool stats, Pitcherless stats we're talking about, that you can see your team's decision values, process plus, or check the free agents in your league and their power. So you could really hone in and use kind of our stats with your specific league context to get the best out of it. And that's, going to be coming out any day now. We're just making sure it's as polished as you'd expect from, Pitcher List. Research wise, I'm doing a lot of fun work with hitter pitcher interactions. So taking the idea of like, this is where this guy adds power, or this is where he whiffs more, and playing that into where this is where a pitcher gets whiffs, or this is, where a pitcher maybe throws meatballs, and trying to give better context for like, based on this matchup, this is what we expect. And even playing back of like, oh, this is, Jordan Walker hits the ball really hard. Maybe he should be swinging more in the zone than he has. Like his decisions, given what we know about him, are different than decisions assuming a generic MLB hitter. And so just trying to get kind of all of these fun, like providing context for who hitters are, who pitchers are, and how they all kind of interact with each other. Just trying to give a better idea of what players look like and how they kind of meet on the field of battle.
Yeah, I think that's really kind of the next frontier of at least public-facing research of what the interactions look like, count leverage, stuff like that. But For Kyle, you can find him on social media at Blandalytics, and you can find me on socials at _Nate Schwartz. But that'll do it for this episode, and we will see you on the next one.